Hi, I'm Justin Lokitz, and this is the Design Shift Podcast, your weekly design guide packed with actionable insights, expert interviews, and bold ideas to help designers at every level lead with clarity, influence change, and shape what's next. In this episode, I sit down with Stephanie Knabe, a longtime friend, collaborator, and one of the sharpest org and people designers I know. Stephanie is the Director of Business and Org Capability at Bill, a fast-growing fintech company. Her job? Design the people systems that keep the company learning, growing, and working well together. Keep listening to hear how Stephanie prototyped a new performance review system using simple documents and real human conversations, why she thinks organizational design is one of the most misunderstood design disciplines, and how she's preparing teams to collaborate not just with each other, but with AI agents too. And if you enjoy this episode, be sure to subscribe to the show and the Design Shift newsletter. Thanks for listening. Okay, well, here we are again, and I'm tremendously excited. I mean, I think everyone who listens to this podcast knows that I'm pretty excited and excitable. But today, more so than normally, in that I have Stephanie Knabe on with me, who I've worked with, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Stephanie is an organizational effectiveness and people design leader whose work blends strategy, systems thinking, and human-centered design. She works at Bill, where she's helping to shape the foundation of leadership development, talent management at a time of massive change and growth, and that's leadership development and talent management. But her path here is anything but linear. She's done international development to design consulting, where we worked hand in hand together, side by side, to building new HR operating systems from scratch. There are literally a metric shit ton of questions I want to ask Stephanie, so we're just going to kick right into it. Thank you, Stephanie, first of all, for being here and for being my friend and agreeing to doing this. Let's just start from the top, shall we?
Let's do it. Thanks for the kind introduction, Justin.
Of course. So we're going to rewind a little bit because I said a lot there. You did not start in HR or in tech or even in design, strategy consulting that you and I did together. You started with global development consulting and learning design. So what drew you to where you are now? Maybe you can sort of draw a path. It wasn't linear, but what's the path that took you from this world of international development and so forth to this world of people, and systems design?
Yeah, great question. So when I started in international development, I was a lowly recruitment assistant, and I would literally walk
Ah,
around the office and give people the resumes of who they're going to interview that day. Like a job that would no longer exist today, right? Like kind of crazy, but evolved into the people world and into that learning and design part. But I think it comes a lot from my past. Growing up as a kid, I grew up on a family farm, was chasing pigs, organizing my dad's farming stuff, like navigating the complex systems that is the world of farming. And I was also that nerd that would literally sit in the living room and facilitate my family conversations. Like, oh, my brother, you haven't spoke up. Now it's your turn. Like asking everyone to like jump into the conversation and making space. And that nerdiness led into my undergrad career where I actually studied organizational communications, learning, and design. Pretty much the nerdiest undergrad. OCLD was the acronym, and there was lots of jokes about being a PowerPoint major and all that good stuff. But in that undergrad, I had a class around systems thinking and really this idea that everything's designed in terms of the world around you. And I was super intrigued by that. Like, what does that mean? What is it? How do you think about that in terms of chaos theory and like chaos in the world around us happening so much? And when I landed into kind of the professional world, I landed in Washington, D.C. I was pursuing some Olympic rowing at the time, and then had this interest to get into international development and this idea of international travel. And so, like, through that evolution of starting as the lowly recruitment assistant and moving into learning and design, I had the opportunity to travel around the world, meeting and working in all of these different cultures in Asia and Africa, and really understanding like what it is to be human and connect across cultures. And I think that helped propel me into eventually the tech sector and a great stint in consulting as well.
love it. I'm going to dig deep here for a second on, I think I don't even really know what international development
Mm,
is. So if you don't mind, maybe describe what that is, and especially with this idea of systems design? What does that mean when you apply systems thinking, systems design, and especially like international development, which don't really know what that
Yeah,
is.
and it's actually been in the news quite a bit because basically Trump dismantled USAID, and that is the United States kind of, offering a handshake across the world. So it's really interesting to think about that's a system that's recently been dismantled, but really what it's about is building democracy, world peace, all through this idea of development. And when I was working for Population Services International, PSI,
So
was
yeah,
really like the premise of that company. The founder was like, "You can get a Coca-Cola in a rural village in the middle of nowhere in Kenya. Like, why can't you get family planning or access to health services? Why is that so complicated compared to this private sector distribution system?" So basically launched an amazing career. There's lots of different nonprofits that were started by that same founder. And this idea that behavior change and how do you use marketing principles to get people to adopt healthy behaviors, to access health services, to plan their family, which ultimately, if you have less children, you're able to invest in them, their education, basically grow your family's prosperity through that idea. And
right.
as a system like the United States giving aid to those countries, it's like, how do we build up these countries and cultures that have been decimated by war, colonialism, the impacts of that aftermath, like very fascinating, lots of systems
Yeah,
within systems, and a
yeah,
lot of people who are really passionate about how do we think about health and kind of that everyone deserves like living a healthy life no matter where you live. And
hmm,
so Population Services International was using the systems of marketing, the systems of behavior change to like pull people in to use those services and save lives ultimately. And like instead of their bottom
yeah,
line, their measure was disability adjusted life years, and how much of like healthy life are people able to live because they're consuming and using bed nets versus or like rehydration salts
right,
or family
right.
services, like a whole smattering of things in the health portfolio, but super fascinating when you think about like, right, there's not a lot of infrastructure in some of these places. So how do you get those services? How do you get those materials? And lots
Yeah,
of amazing stories of how they made that happen across lots of different cultures and places.
that's huge. And yeah, that is true systems and systems and systems, and like you said, across cultures. Here you were at PSI and doing big system design or being part of a big system, right? And big system design, and like you said, systems and systems and systems. And I think about what you do at Bill, and sorry, what's your role at Bill? What's your
Yeah,
title at Bill?
director of business and org capability.
Okay, so Director of Business and Org Capability. Here you are also dealing with systems and I'm guessing then business and org capability. Those are the systems and the people in those systems. So maybe tell me a little bit about like what's that link there, or what's the path then from that what you did at big PSI, the global stuff to where you are at Bill now, and maybe different systems but similar challenges. I don't know, something
Yeah,
like that.
great. So I think what I learned from PSI is people are people, no matter where you are in the globe. Folks want to have a career, they want to have their families, they want to have a stable, prosperous life. And so it's really fascinating. A lot of that development sector, working in the nonprofit, people who are in the private sector or in tech are like, that's like so different. And when I think about my career, I was doing some of the same work, like facilitating conversations, working with leaders, talking about how can we grow and help you learn within that structure of the nonprofit international development world. And those same skills totally translated to Bill. We are the champions of small and medium-sized businesses. We've been a public company since 2019. So we're in that teenager growing up years of becoming that tech company, that tech giant that we have aspirations to be. And within all of those systems, it's all about how do we scale and designing for growth and designing for scale. So when I joined Bill, there was a lot of things that you're like, wait, we don't have that written down. You can't find that anywhere. What?
Yeah.
Like there's
Yeah.
all this tribal knowledge happening, these systems that people may or may not know that they're part of or like how to interact with. And so really
Mhm.
talking about what does it mean to be performing here at Bill? Like, how are we raising the bar to help us meet those growth aspirations as a business? How do we think about learning and designing conversations for organizational health? All of these different elements also like have that systems within systems because you have like our amazing founder Renee and then that executive team, the organizations that they lead all the way to the individual, and my role really spans that whole gamut from like our executive leaders to like that frontline builder and how are they thinking about learning and growing in their job.
Yeah, I really love that. And what I'm hearing here is, okay, so design, we can, and I'm going to ask you here in a little bit what design means to you. But what I'm hearing here is design isn't just doing the thing, right? Doing the design or following a design process. But what I'm hearing as well is it's also codifying how we do those processes and how we work together, which is certainly almost any other kind of design, but also how we measure it, right? Because you mentioned the same thing from PSI, and you're measuring not just lifespan but also health span, something like that. And it sounds like there's something similar going on with the kind of design you're doing at Bill, which is, are we growing in a healthy way, or have we codified the systems in a way that we can all follow these or challenge them, but know that we're challenging them, measure them properly. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. I think about when I was in the DMBA, we talked about product design, and I was a total nerd, like
Yeah.
the empathy, understanding the customer, like how do you kind of work through these processes to create a product? And within our people team, we talk about people products. And those products are like your annual performance review, which, a lot of people are like, oh, I hate that process. So it's like, how do we think about our customers as our employees? How do we simplify that work, especially in the age of AI? How do we make it like a really meaningful conversation where that humanness comes through versus like a transactional conversation? And those kind of moments of our builders connecting and having really good conversations, sometimes hard conversations, is only what helps us grow and learn as a company. And so I think there's a lot of connection thinking back to that idea of design and the systems that we interact with in our workplaces. There's a handful of people that like think that way in terms of the people team. So I'm so thankful
Yeah.
to like have my friends and colleagues here at Bill. My boss actually, she's like, "The work of the work is figuring out how to work together," because as we're
Yeah.
talking about moving into scale, we're talking about pursuing new customers, new different areas of our business, like, how do we do that? And I've sort of realized in my career, a lot of it's making stuff up, and people are making stuff up, so why not use good design frameworks and customer empathy and these different skills and all the great things learned from the DMBA to weave through those processes and conversations.
That's fantastic. Well, I mean, you're mentioning the DMBA, and this is the design MBA that both Stephanie and I went to different years, but then we ended up working together anyways. Maybe tell us a little bit about that DMBA and why that program, and maybe even how, the that program shifted your perspective or even your trajectory vis-a-vis design and what you do
Yeah,
today.
yeah, that's a great question. I remember being at this point in my career at PSI. I'd been there a really long time. We were getting into innovation and talking about
Mm.
like high performing teams and how do you like spark really great ideas? Because there's so much creativity that happens across the world.
Yeah.
And like, how do you harness that and make the difference when it's people's lives? So I really wanted to join a grad program and understand business more and then also this innovation side and like creativity, and found the DMBA was a perfect match for that. Like, it's not often that you find an MBA program within an art school. You're like, okay, that sounds interesting.
It's weird.
Tell me
Yeah.
more. Like, and so
Uh-huh.
through the DMBA, I realized, being a nonprofit person, kind of like have this mentality of capitalism is bad, like it's wrecking the world. And then came through the DMBA realizing, oh, like it's really capitalism, you can simplify it in the sense of it's a exchange of needs and an exchange of value for those needs. And so that helped broaden my perspective in terms of like, right, Workday is also a fantastic company that I've worked for, and they provide HR software for companies, and people need to be able to support their employees, pay them well, like have systems that just hum in the background and can even be leveraged to like strategically build your company. So it was like this kind of eye-opening experience because there were so many people from so many different walks of life in the DMBA, and it helped me broaden beyond that nonprofit mindset into like consulting and ultimately understanding like the tech sector and what's happening there. And so much of innovation and that creativity baked in is what you see a lot in the tech world. And so that really drew me in. And I think, like, through the program, there was an aspect of, like, owning that designer title, and, lots of
Yeah.
people kinda grapple with that going through the program, and so kind of fully stepped into that, and I remember when I pitched myself kinda moving out of the nonprofit sector, like, "I'm an organizational designer and business strategist," which is actually how I start my interviews if I interview for anything new and what ultimately I pitched myself here at Bill.
And it goes back to right codifying that, right? Here you are, you just codified yourself, and it sounds like the DMBA helped you to find that, whatever that lock was, like, oh, this is me, this is what I
Yeah,
do.
and kinda opening up that perspective.
Yeah,
There's ways to kinda plug
yeah,
in, and it's all how you tell your story, and really
yeah,
codifying that experience and design and skills that you have, and there's companies that are searching for that. They want that in their company and their company culture.
yeah. Love it. So here's the existential question that I try to ask everyone, which is, what is design? What does design mean to you, specifically you, and maybe even how has it changed over time?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a kind of a intimidating question when you throw it out, but
Mhm.
as I was thinking about
Yeah.
this and breaking it down, I think in different phases of my life, it's meant different things to me. Like in college, I was working like through that organizational learning and design program, and design was a lot about art and graphic design and the actual visual design of how do you create a marketing campaign? How do you create the graphics that support and create energy and appeal for people. And then early in my career working at PSI, it was like, how do you design a meeting? How do you design a conversation to like get to the outputs that will ultimately help the team succeed and help the team thrive? And then thinking about in the tech world, you see a lot of like, people are it's sometimes mind-blowing to me where people are, like, making the future in terms of the digital experience. You're like, "Wow, it's kinda like building roads when we were in the frontier." Like, they're building the virtual roads and continuing to refine what it means to, like, log into a system or interact with something as a product. And so that design experience extends to the UI, UX, and all the people behind it. How are you designing those people systems that folks are interacting with? How do you think about the team environment? There's so much design layered into our virtual world, which is just endless and super exciting. And I think even now where I'm at in my life is like, how am I designing my life? What's important to me? How do I think about balancing life things, work things, personal things, all of that, and really being thoughtful and intentional.
Yeah, makes total sense. When I think about design, and I'm also want to get to what you do at Bill, and we're going to keep going deeper and deeper. When I think about design, I often think about this idea of prototyping, right? How do we work together to, understand and ideate, and eventually, like, what can we test? What can we measure in small ways before we, expand into this thing and scale? And here you are at Bill, also helping this company to scale. Where does prototyping, when it comes to people and people design, where does prototyping come in? And this is just like a me thing, and maybe it doesn't come in the same way as I think it
Yeah,
comes in.
yeah, it's a great question. I had a really fun project this spring where we were asked by our chief people officer to change how we do our performance management system and how do we think about talent and actually enabling all the amazing talent we have here at Bill and not making it this like super rigid process that's kind of old school. How do you really bring life and intention into that? And so I actually got a chance to flex that prototyping skill by just putting out like here's three different options of if you were to have a review or give feedback to different peers, like what would you want the questions to be? Here's option one, two, three, four. Tell me what you think as you look at those different options, like what resonates, what doesn't, why, like what does that get to you, like how does that drive a more meaningful conversation? And I got a chance to interview over 20 some different leaders across our business and just spending time with them and asking those questions, putting up a very simple like Word document with some text. That's the lo-fi version, and that's evolved into how are we thinking about launching feedback now at the end of the month, and how are we creating this like bigger system that has all these different touch points that doesn't seem so overwhelming, but more of a continuous loop for folks.
Right. Oh, that's great. I had heard a great quote yesterday because this lo-fi reminds me, and that like Word docs, it's a totally lo-fi way to do that, especially with leaders. And the quote went something like this, and it came from a NASA talk at an AIGA conference that lo-fi prototypes bring hi-fi results or bring hi-fi feedback, right? Which is exactly what you just said. These are systems that really need to work at the end of the day, and to provide whatever feedback people need, or maybe it's promotions, whatever it is, bring people together. And here you are, the lo-fi prototype of that is like, hey, yeah, here's some options for doing that. Which ones work, which ones don't, why? Yeah,
Totally.
super
And like, how
interesting.
do you take those nuggets of the conversation and then work it into a pilot and saying, like, okay, let's try something. Like,
Yeah,
pretend it's like a little mini review cycle. We're going to give you 30 days.
that's so
Kind of
good.
awkward, like 30 days versus 6 months, but like, give it a try. Tell us
Right.
what you think. So we actually piloted some
Yeah.
different agents, AI agents, and kind of seeing how
Mm.
can we automate some of that work, what's useful. It was really fascinating because it was a bit of a fail. Like, we didn't really make it through the pilot. People just kind of were like, meh, but it was huge
That's
in
great.
terms of like, right, I want it in the system. Don't make me do all this other work on the side. Like, I'm busy. I got to do.
Right.
And so
Right.
that was a huge takeaway for us, even though it felt like a failure. And we're like, oh, like that didn't really work. When you set up a pilot and you're prototyping things, you want to be like, dun, 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 like it worked.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
actually, to your
Yeah.
point, much more meaningful for it to fail. And what do you learn out of that? And how do you take learning
Right.
forward?
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. That I love the failures because of that, and especially the quick failures, because you could have done a 6 month thing or a year long thing, and then like, oh shit, we didn't get any result. How are we going to do this? Like, how are we going to get these results? Well, you got the results. You got the results in a month, and the results were like, this doesn't
Yeah.
work. Great. Now you don't have to worry about I mean, you perhaps have to redo it, but you don't have to worry about, oh no, 6 months in or a year in, and we got nothing. That would be probably
Yeah. Or
problematic.
we're
Yeah.
trying to get everyone excited about this change. We launched it. Everyone hates
Yeah.
it.
No
Oh,
one
crap,
cares.
like,
Yeah.
that totally went
Yeah.
poorly.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
previous chief people officer, he was like had a great story in terms of thinking about people products where it's how do you build these small failures? He's like, "I went back in the workshop and the team, and we did all this stuff, and we launched it, and we didn't ever ask one, and it
Yeah.
epically failed." And so you're like, "Right, yep." That's, like, the number one way to make sure it doesn't work is not asking people, not trying it, not doing those little experiments,
That's right.
like, see
Yeah.
what's the nugget of insight to help you pivot and actually make the right
Mhm.
system, make right design choices.
Right, right. Yeah, this is great. Okay, I want to ask you then about how this stuff works in Bill. So here you are, you're at Bill, you're building leadership development org capabilities, and you mentioned, and this is a time of growth. You IPO'd in 2019. I think, what is it, 2,000 some plus employees, something like that, and you're trying to scale this stuff. So what does your role then, as a director of business and org capability actually look like on a day-to-day basis? You mentioned these little tests, but tell me a little bit more. Like, what does it look like? Where does design fit in day
Yeah,
to day?
yeah. So I think that prototype example is how we're designing how we talk about performance, how it's evaluated, communicated, calculated across
Yeah,
the company. Because obviously, if you want to keep growing, having a high bar, holding kind of that uh, level of excellence for the team is really important. And so that's like one little piece in terms of performance. How do we think about our talent that I work on? But I also get to spend time with people managers, consulting with our executive leaders. I've loved some offsite conversations where it's like, this isn't working between some teams. And how do we break that open and find the path forward? And Bill went through a couple acquisitions, so finding that like that path and having people understand each other and get to that, similar mindset and ways of working is so important. And it's fascinating, like that's kind of age-old conversations in terms of how do you get people working best together. And there's a ton of great frameworks and things out there that just work every time, which is
yeah,
cool. But then
yeah,
there's also working with like our more of our frontline employee population. Literally later this afternoon, I get to talk about how do you accelerate your leadership and your leadership capacity with some folks who want to move into people management. And what does that career journey look like? How do you build in thoughtful experiences and kind of make yourself your own design experiment to learn different things and put yourself in experiences that you can fail, learn from, and apply for moving forward. So there's lots of variety in terms of the day to day. Definitely don't get bored in terms of all.
I was going to say it does not sound boring. Yeah, it sounds like you're in many respects a corporate cultural, anthropologist come also like service
Mhm.
designer, right? Because you're not just watching what people are doing and listening, but you're intentionally teaching, but also putting things in place so that they do something, react to something, whatever, right? That's what it sounds like to me. Is that right?
And I think you're constantly thinking about, okay, this is the aspect of our culture that's great and we want to protect. And here's this little part that we
Yeah.
need to evolve and think differently about. And like we're
Yeah.
launching OKRs as a company. We're talking about operating principles, like all of these foundational frameworks that really help people navigate their work and how they interact with each other. And it's like a really
Mm.
fascinating conversation to see, okay, we introduced that, like, what's it gonna look like in 6 months, 9 months? Like, or is it gonna help people? What's the part that's, like, still confusing or getting in the way or that's not working? How do we tweak it and move forward? So there's so many different opportunities to think about that.
Yeah. It's great. You came to Bill from you were at Workday before, and you mentioned that before. And Workday is a much larger company, also here in the Bay Area, but a really big company. What are the differences then? And maybe I don't know exactly what you were doing at Workday, so maybe you could spell that out a little bit. But you came from Workday, this big company. It had been around for a while as well, and now you moved into, and you're basically kind of building from scratch. And it seems at Bill. What were you doing at Workday, and how does that translate, or maybe how is it different than what you do at
Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah, when I started at Workday, we were around 9,000 employees, and when I left, it was
Yeah, okay.
20,000. So, like and that's just in a span of, like, 4-ish years, so
Yeah.
pretty crazy to
Uh-huh.
double in size, and so I think a lot of my work at Workday was around organizational effectiveness, bringing leaders together, thinking about what is that North Star? How do we organize the ways that we work together? What's the right mixture of people to support that strategy, the ways of working? How do we really think about that full package to deliver on the aspirations for Workday? And a lot of those it was basically designing conversations is kind of what I saw my job as in that company. And working with amazing leaders that you see on the stage at Rising, like those folks are people and they want the best for their team. They want to like get shit done, make an impact, like achieve the company goals and ultimately help the customers because Workday has an amazing customer network. So cool in terms of what they're doing. And, you know, as I think about where we're at with Bill, Workday was all about scale and designing for scale, and you literally saw it in terms of teams they put in place, systems, and all of these different elements, even within the people team. And here at Bill, we're building for scale, but we have to kind of get the foundation in place first to then be able to drive that growth and what that looks like. So everything that we're designing for now, we're not quite thinking like, okay, if we were to double in size, how would that system work? But in the back of our mind, that is a design criteria. How do we make this scalable so that as we continue growing, it's not something that we have to redesign every time. And it's so unique that we have to like change it. How do you make something stable so then you can invest your energy in other areas?
Makes sense. And it sounds like okay, you're building the foundations. This is people strategy writ large in many respects. How do you in building from scratch and designing these people systems and this people strategy, how do you connect it to business outcomes? How do you measure success in something like this as you're thinking about scale? You're mentioning like you thinking about scale, but really you're building foundations so that you can think more about scale. How do you measure that?
Yeah, I think at this point, sometimes we have these moments where we're like, wow, remember 2 years ago when we were doing this like this? And then we'll have a good laugh of like, oh, was a crazy time, and I think some of those measures are a bit anecdotal, but I think certainly at Bill, that conversation comes from, "Remember when that wasn't written down or we didn't have an intranet as a company? Wow, that was wild." And then now it's like, how much are people using that intranet? Can we look at the data in terms of how much people are consuming the different materials? Do people actually know what's going on? Like, are we getting lots of questions? Are they using the things that we're putting out? How do we use data to inform those conversations and further refine how we're reaching people, how we're communicating things, how we're actually designing our systems? And so I think in that sense of like designing for scale and evaluating, we are constantly our current chief people officer is very much like data driven. What's the data say? How much are
Cool.
people engaging? How do you think about those different levels of evaluation to know if something's actually working? And when is it not worth the squeeze, right? The juice worth the squeeze. Okay, we're spending a lot of money here. How could we repurpose that because people aren't engaging? It's not meaningful. How do we repurpose it into something, an experience, and resources that people do find meaningful and help them improve their work and ultimately succeed in their roles?
Right. I mean, it's what's fascinating to me is, here I am also still teaching in the DMBA, and I teach business model innovation, which is what we did
Hmm.
together. And we brought in, branding and marketing strategy and courses like that. And of course, and just like what you studied in undergrad and also, of course, grad school, right? You're measuring people, you're measuring clicks, you're measuring, interactions with something and like classic design and classic
Yeah.
marketing. And what's fascinating, what you're saying is uh, intranet systems, right? So just internal portals and resources and things like that are just as important as any other external system because you're also trying to measure effectiveness. You're trying to measure how much people are interacting or reading something. I mean, that's to me that's fascinating because you're still designing for people. It's the same people. It's just you're designing internal
Yeah.
system. It's internal
It's like an
systems.
internal
Yeah.
product versus like how much are
Yeah.
using, like swiping their card for this or that. Like, where's the data, right?
Yeah.
In terms of if you're in product design, what's the insight there? Like, what's the insight of how people are interacting with the tools? And we get lots of questions, and some of them you're like, "I thought we said that to people. Why is everyone asking that question?" All right, because nobody read it. Like, okay, we need to package that differently. Like, it's the insight there is like
Right.
we need to change our behavior because that's what we're seeing reflected and it's not working. So how do we pivot? And it's to all
Right.
sorts of like, yeah, funny jokes, but then also like how do you evolve what you're working on to respond to the needs of humans and people?
Right. Right. Yeah. By the way, you are totally demystifying what org design is to me. Again, I kind of know what it is, but now you're totally demystifying it, and I really appreciate this. Yeah, I can go on all day about
Yeah.
that. Um, I want to get to you mentioned AI, and you brought in some agents and so forth into at least one of these prototypes for evaluations, something like that. And it's quite obvious that it's AI is here and it's shifting how we think about everything, internal systems, external systems, everything else. Where are you seeing it show up in Bill, specifically internally in your own work? And how are you talking about it, and maybe even what tools and how are leaders thinking about AI, especially in an org design and systems design
Yeah,
internally?
yeah. It's really fascinating because you're like, okay, like lots of people are like, it's gonna change the world, it's gonna make everything easy. And you're like,
Yeah,
cool. Yeah,
sure.
but how? Or like, where's the
Right.
human in the loop there? Because it's not like we want to automate everything and the robots do everything. Like we still want to be engaged in the
Hmm.
world around us. So we're actually just
Hmm.
having a team conversation about like where's like the human part that can't be replaced and where is like that assist from AI or automating those different workflows that's going to make you more effective. And I think we're exploring this around, performance conversations where it's like, yeah, right. Like I can't remember what I did 6 months ago, but that's our review period. So
Yeah.
how can something go through? We use Glean here at Bill, and how can it go through all my different documents and help me remember shout outs or different things that I've worked on to like help summarize? That's great. But like, can it automate the conversation? And we were literally talking about could you like do a comparison of like an AI performance review versus like a human one, and how would that be different? And I think it's like so fascinating. Sometimes people want to use AI to like avoid hard things or avoid conversations. And that's actually what's uniquely human, and where we can have that contextual understanding and respond to facial expressions and all of these different things to deliver a more human, empathetic message. And so, like, it's interesting to kind of balance, how do you make it easier and more streamlined for people using that technology in the way that where it's at today? Like, it'll continue growing and changing and getting better, and what that looks like, and how do you like carve out that human space that, like, you know, we were like cavemen drawing pictures and having
Yeah.
conversations,
Yeah.
like that's just for centuries humans connecting and having those real conversations is so important. So I think for us here at Bill, it's really thinking about, where do we distinguish, like what's uniquely for our people managers and our builders to really think about and have those meaningful conversations with the assist of AI, and with like making tasks more easy, streamlined where it can be possible. And even
Yeah.
following like the broader technologists and people trends in the marketplace, there's some really interesting conversations about like work design. So if I think about my role and what's possible to like automate within that, previous, it was more of like, how do we streamline how people are interacting with each other? If we
Right.
can create bots that do these different interactions with each other, like, how does that fit into your work? And so what? Like, so what does it give you? So if it creates more time on what? Like, how do you distinguish that importance and thinking about work design? And there's certainly radical things ways you can think about that, but then it also comes back to like, how are we connecting and having conversations and treating each other too? Like that really humanity piece of it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, it feels, on one hand, it is a set of new tools, right? Or in, in design and art, we've started to call them also new materials,
Mhm.
right? They're things that enter into a workflow that are not just a tool, but it's a material, something like that. So on one hand, it's tools. On the other hand, what I'm seeing a lot out there, and I have another consulting role with a new company called Ethereum Partners that we've created, where what we're starting to see and do are bring in AI agents that are really like junior, they're like interns or junior associates on a team, where you give them a task, right, or a set of tasks, and you're slacking to them. That's the interface. It's basically like another
Mm.
person, but it's. And I wonder, as you're thinking about these things and what you're doing, and and whether they're tools or something else, how does that change when someone now, has more time to do their human things because they're working in a very human way with a bot, right? And I don't know if there's a good answer there, but they're working with a coworker that just isn't
Yeah.
human. How do you how do we design for that? Like, how do we design, going back to even the evaluations of how humans are performing? How do we design for that? How do we design for this species, collaboration, co-creation, whatever it is? Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because you can see like, out in the media, it's like AI is gonna replace entry level jobs, or like, isn't it
Yeah.
like, I don't know, sometimes I have, every day I flip flop my mind in terms of like, it is the future, and be like, no, it's like mobile. Like,
Right.
mobile, people
Right.
are like, "It's gonna change everything." And you're like, "Now I carry my phone around and I can look at stuff and that information is there, but, like,
Right.
is my life fundamentally different? I don't know." So I think in terms of your question about, like, how do we think about, those interactions when we don't yet know what's possible, I think it comes back to, like, where how are we interacting, and where understanding what that technology can do and why, like what's the benefit, again the measures, like is it productivity, is it time
Yeah.
saved, like how do you measure the impact of that? Because sometimes I'm like, I think it'd be faster for me to just do the thing versus set up the agent to do the thing, but it depends how many
Yeah.
times you're doing the thing, right? Like, If you're doing
Right.
it over and over,
Right.
it probably does. If it's a unique one-time thing that requires some of that complex decision making or like having context and like that human experience, maybe not. And I think it's that constant tension of understanding where it's valuable and where it's not, and like, how do you use it as, like, the spark, and as a human, you continue to push that idea forward? Like a collaborator versus doing for you, like, there's that whole spectrum of how you can use AI, and I'm just fascinated to see
Right.
how it will turn out because everyone's prototyping how to make it happen, how to improve your life using it, and also,
Yep.
how do you make sure it doesn't, like, go to the dark side and the creepy version?
Yeah.
Like, we even
Yeah.
have AI summaries here at Bill, and I, like, do my own notes because 'cause I'm just that nerd, and one time I was looking back at a conversation, I was like, "I don't remember that theme coming up," and I looked at my notes, not a single word of it, and it had that hallucination. I'm like, "Wow," like, if I could just,
Huh.
you know, thought that that conversation, that person was talking a lot about conflict, but the AI totally inserted that in there. I don't know why, like, I don't know where it got that from, but it was my first real experience of being like, "Whoa," like, that's not what happened, but it has a different, like, articulation of that, and you can really get into some crazy themes about, like, truth, what's real, like, perception, all of that
Yeah.
stuff, and I think, the ethics and creativity and all those different elements will become so much more important as we think about, is that helping? Is it making the difference? Is that worth the sacrifice of these
Yeah.
errors that could happen using that? It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
It's great. It's fascinating. It is totally fascinating, and both light and dark. I mean, all those things. It's technology, and so here we are, humans. This technology is always our thing. It's always our our savior and our downfall at the same time. And yeah, it's truly fascinating. If you when you think about that now as a people designer, what skills then, people that are coming up now in people design and org design, what new skills do you think they need or they should be thinking about or learning as they're coming up? Because I came up in a totally different time. Technology, yes, was around, and we were wielding technology in new ways. This is a bit different, of course. What do they need to know as they're coming up in people org design?
Yeah, I think it's all the more important, in the DMBA we talked about human-centered design, where it's
Yeah,
that
yeah.
experience that people are having. How do you hold empathy? Like, sure, you
Mhm.
can write those into prompts, but you might be kind of underwhelmed by the response. I actually took a AI and design thinking course for my DO this summer, and
Nice.
they're
Yeah,
showing
cool.
kind of the evolution of how their class and the prompts have changed over time, and you're like, "Yeah, cool," and then there's still, like, okay, what's the, like, insight? What's the nugget? What's the aha moment that sure, AI can produce, like, a long running list of things, but as a human, like, where am I building those connections, looking for those layers, thinking about the systems within systems that, like, it's really hard to write a prompt for that, or, that kind of contextual magic that we as humans bring to life is hard to replace, and I think building those skills is so important to, like, keep that human connection and that perspective. Something else that I think is really important too, as we get into this world of technology and all of these things it can do for you, is continuing those connections with different folks, and also have done some work around network leadership and how do you future proof your network? How do you think about those connections you have and those connections you'll need in your life, in your professional life, whatever it might be? I think that that spark of human interaction and that aha moment that you get with a diverse network is still gonna be something that's really important for people, especially as technology continues to evolve and there's all this nuance. We're gonna be constantly learning from each other, and your network is your best place to kinda take those learnings, apply, and get to an even better outcome.
Yeah, that's great. I also in the DMBA, we had a guest lecturer when I was a student, and that was basically what his whole philosophy was. LinkedIn, whatever you're using as your network, professional, in this case, professional network. But that was his point: was how do you keep, these sort of network
Mhm.
healthy, and how do you keep a bunch of people in that network sort of warm all the time, because if you could just go away, they forget about you, and then you come back and they're like, oh, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, right? Okay, great. Now you're back top of mind. But then if you let it go, it kind of goes away again. Yeah, and it's a very human thing, and I wonder, yeah, is technology help with something like that? Does it hurt something like that? Is that an only human thing? Is there AI as part of that too? I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, it's like a human thing to be like, "Oh, man, I haven't talked to Justin in forever." Like, I don't know if he still
Yeah,
remembers
yeah,
me or, like, cares what I'm up to, right? Like, and I think
yeah.
that's, like, some of the really simple technology of, yeah, you can put a calendar thing to, like, reach out or,
Mm,
like, catch up, like, that kinda thing. Or even I've done something where I put in, like, a prompt of, like, "Oh, I haven't talked to someone and I wanna write them a thank you because I something made me think of them. I haven't talked to them, like, what suggestions would you have?" And it's, like, some of that, like,
that's
seem
cool.
like
Yeah.
you get over yourself in terms of, like, I'm, like, scared or I don't wanna reach out," and, like, "Yeah, sure, easy, like,
Right.
here's what you do," like,
Right.
kinda breaking down some of those barriers, but I don't think
Yeah.
it's gonna, like, take it away, right? Like, you still it
Mm,
would be really awkward if you got, like, a bot from me that's like, "Hey, Justin, Stephanie's thinking of you and, like, thinks the DM."
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not really
Yeah.
helping my life, right? Like, I'd rather talk to her, right? And, uh,
Right.
there's
Right.
some of that, like, even if you automate things, how does it sound? How do you make it sound like you so it's not super weird? Like, I don't know,
Hmm.
like, it feels like that kind of super, like, sci-fi stuff will be maybe years away, and I'm sure there's people, like, working on it right now, but I think there's still, like, some of those how do you use the tools to help you connect and, like, get over, like, your hesitations or, like, help you remember things, like, all of that kind of context, I think technology can help, but you still have to do it. You still have to take the action, be invested, like,
Yeah.
care about those connections. And, what's really interesting in that network leadership kind of theory is like there's different kinds of connections. There's people that you can innovate with and brainstorm. There's people that will challenge you and be like, no, like, did you think about this, that, the other thing? There's people that will just like pump you up and kind of energize you. Like, what kind of connections do you need for what you're doing and where are you at in your life? And like, sure, you could ask a bot, like, this is what's going on. What would you suggest? But you still have to, like, take the action, have the thought, like, create that momentum is what I say.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's great. I just want to ask one more question in this vein of technology. And maybe it's not technology. I don't know. I love this idea of what you're doing at Bill and what you did at Workday, and certainly even what you did with BMI and before that with PSI, all these acronyms. Um, Maybe it's AI, maybe it's something else, maybe it's something deeper. What's a one future of work trend that you think is even maybe underrated and perhaps even misunderstood in all of this?
Yeah, yeah, I read something recently from Josh Bersin, and he was talking about, like, that change in job design and job crafting at scale. Like,
Yeah,
is our job as humans eventually to, like, manage the agents? And, like, what does
right,
that look like when agents are, like, learning and getting better and doing different things day by day? Like, you know, an agent today versus an agent like 9 months ago, like, I don't even remember seeing what those look like, right? And now it's everywhere, right? So, how do you, like, keep pace and ultimately be that orchestrator? I think there's so much interesting stuff, like, if you see what Workday is up to, like, they're embedding it into their platform, they have so much data that they can learn from and have within their ecosystem that it's not, like, so scary to interact with, and it's helping you move through these processes that you'll probably always have to do, right? Like, you'll probably have to write a performance review. You probably will get paid a bonus. Like, how do you interact with the system and how does it become really intuitive versus like the clunky experience today that some of the corporate environment
that's
like, yeah,
interesting.
I wanted to catch up to like my Amazon purchasing something and remembering that I bought paper towels a month ago and it's time to buy more, right? Or like suggesting that I switch to cloth tiles to be more sustainable, right? Like there's so many different
Right,
nuances when you see what some companies are doing. How can you take that and embed it into a different area? And so it, like from that work design, what does that look like? What are those tasks, things that you're interacting with on a people system perspective? How do you make it easier? How do you make it more simple? I think that will be the constant quest, and, like, there's people who are total nerds thinking about it, and, like, for folks that aren't in that people systems design space, you're more like, "Why isn't this working better?" Or, "Why is it taking me so long to do?" Like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's this whole kind of underworld of, like, the people thinking about how the work of the work gets done or how people
Yeah.
together, and I think that'll be really interesting to see how it evolves over time as well.
Yeah, that is what's fascinating about what you just said there is it made me click into, you and I have both done a lot of work in nonprofits, but also more in for-profits, at least for
Yeah,
me. And when I'm thinking about doing work in nonprofits, often the struggle that a nonprofit leadership team has is thinking about themselves, and what they're doing is this is a business, right? This is just a business. It just happens that we can't take profit in the same way, or we can't record profit
yeah,
really in the
yeah.
same way. But outside of that, it works the same way. You create, deliver, and capture value
Mhm.
or exchange value, and that's it. And it sounds like that's to me, and this is what's fascinating about what you just said, is this future of work is about, it doesn't matter if it's for profit, nonprofit, it's about looking to the outside. What are we doing in marketing and sales and trying to get people to do something, buy something, whatever, but make it easy for them? How do we bring some of those things internal into these internal systems to make it easier for them to do their
Yeah.
jobs inside of this business? Something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's like, I think, as humans, we like copy, right? If it's over there,
Yeah,
copy and
yeah,
put it over here, and the context might be different, and that
right.
might spark something else. And that's kind of the beauty of innovation and the magic where that happens,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, no matter your sector, I think everyone's in this time of experimenting and, "Oh, that's what they're doing
Mm-hmm.
over there, like, can I create a lo-fi
Mm-hmm.
thing over here?" Like, even our own pilot that I was talking about earlier that failed, it's like we were trying to do it outside of the Workday system, and then, oh, you go to
Yeah.
Rising and like, "Oh, here's all the cool things they're doing in the system." Yep, I think we'll probably
Yeah.
turn that on, like, get people engaged in how you're doing that, like, this it's really
Yeah.
interesting to think about copycatting, and I've even read things in terms of how people are using AI, like, folks wanna learn from their peers, like, "What are you doing? How are you using it? How is it saving you time?" And that's helping push people forward more than having just a leader or whatever listening to the noise and saying, "Use AI, like, it's gonna be" right?
Right.
It's like, for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
for what? For, like, what value does it create? How does that exchange of value help me? How can I copy from
Yeah.
other people to make my life easier, right? Like, I think it's a really
Yeah.
fascinating, like, human human interactions that drive those aha moments.
Right, right. Again, it goes back to you and all of us being sort of these cultural anthropologists, come designer makers.
Yeah.
Yeah. What all right, so now you're internally, what's something that you're learning or wrestling with right now in your work that and maybe it's AI and maybe you already said it, but what's something that you're like, huh, how do we do this thing and build this thing or something like
Yeah. Yeah, we are literally wrestling with, like, how do we launch our mid-year performance talent conversations? Like, how this
Okay.
meaningful. What are those communication channels, like messages, audiences, like that marketing that we talked about earlier? Like, we literally we're on a whiteboard and mapping it all out, right? And I'm sure people, like the
Hmm.
everyday employee, is like, "What? Like, that's what you were doing? Like, I saw this thing in a newsletter and that was it?" Like, so, it's interesting to think about above the line, below the line, behind the scenes, how much thoughtfulness or intention goes behind some of these, like,
Hmm.
to the everyday employees, like, yeah, that's like I spent 10 minutes on that, kind of interactions, but some of the stuff that we're
Right.
grappling with and how does it link to a broader philosophy of how we think about our people and that experience? Like, imagine the best case scenario, imagine the worst case scenario. How does all of that play out as you're thinking about the comms, thinking about the messaging, thinking about the actual system? There's so many great colleagues that we're working at, like, building the system. They're like, if this, then what? And if this, then what? And you're like, oh, right. We need to, like, think through the decision tree of all those different elements to make sure that it works. Cause there's always going to be that random use case that might trip things up or might create a bug or whatever it might be. So that's some of the things that we're thinking through in that sort of big people system that touches everyone
Yeah.
here at Bell.
Yeah. What I mean, it sounds like you're not alone in this, and you've got and you've got the chief people officer who's also data driven. Um, what kind of culture then are you trying to design, to build at Bill, internally between teams, sort of inter-team or
Yeah.
intra-team? What, yeah, what does that look like? And again, in your foundation, right, you're hoping to scale and you're looking to scale. You've IPO'd, so you kind of
Yeah.
have to. Yeah, what is
Yeah,
that?
totally.
What are you trying to
Yeah,
build?
it's
Yeah.
it's really fascinating that you asked that because we have articulated company values and how that connects to culture. We're actually doing an exercise when our chief people officer came in. She asked people about culture and was like, I got like a million different answers. Every person, it was something different, which that's beautiful. But also, what is that core experience? How do we want to talk about how we show up to each other and hold these different expectations? So we're actually going through that iteration of like, let's talk about our values. How do we articulate our culture? How do we have that show up in all these different touch points, our existing employee touch points and touch points for leaders, but also like future facing ones. We're like, oh, we want to build this cool program that engages leaders in this way, or really blowing out this idea of developing people into people managers if that's what their path wants to be. And how do you bake in culture and experiences into those moments and those moments that matter for people in a really meaningful way where they're like, wow, that's totally Bill. That it's not, it couldn't possibly be at any other company because our culture here is so powerful, so great, like so unique. And it's actually really fun to think about all of those different touch points and how do you create that magic that people walk away saying, being able to say the same phrase, being able to say the same things, have a similar experience, plus having all their nuanced and different flavors with it as well.
Right, right. It's this. I saw this graph, and I still use it every once in a while. It was made by the design company Explain. That first people hear the thing, right? Then they believe it, and then eventually they live it, right? And kind of what you're saying is what you're trying to develop there is not only the culture that everyone hears and perhaps believes in, but eventually lives it, and then when they repeat it, it's the same, something like
Yeah,
that.
and it's like, how do you go from awareness to, like, applying that awareness into action, into,
Yeah.
like, what we were talking codifying into, like, yeah, that's definitely the
Mm.
experience, and it comes through in spades, I would know if I was in a different company because this is so unique to us. Uh
Yeah.
there's another element too where we're talking about operating principles, about being customer centric, working with speed,
Hmm.
having ownership mindset, all these different traits where it's like, how do you balance those in terms of your day-to-day work? And if you're making trade-offs to like implement something with speed versus that ownership mindset, people can get into their turf wars or like, but we're trying to move fast. And how do you like grapple and balance with that? And so we're also having conversations about what does that mean? How does that come to life in terms of thinking about the work that's happening around the company? How do you create meaning around that and shared understanding, which is also super cool and interesting.
Yeah, it is super cool and interesting. And again, like you've totally illuminated this whole field for me, so I appreciate you for
Yeah.
that. Um, what advice would you give to someone who wants to do this, wants to do the people design that's not just HR, but really think holistically internally about people design and process design and all the systems level stuff that you do today? What advice would you give to someone?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. I think there's always like an element of personal inventory. Like, what is your zigzag story, and what are those skills in a different context? If you package them differently, might resonate in a different context. Thinking that internal piece, like I've seen people move from marketing externally into internal marketing and communications, and it's like those same skills. It's just a different audience and some different flavors there. But I think that personal inventory helps you understand what you have to offer and how you can plug in. And there's certainly always an evolution of learning languages and how people like, can you say the words of the things as like an anthropologist that creates the open gate to like get you in, so to speak. But I also think there's an element of just raising your hand, like raising your hand to be part of a project team, start doing the work on the side, like dabbling, prototyping, experimenting. We see a lot of people leaders who are champions of these different practices and principles in their business. And how do you like take every opportunity to like do it and try things out and
Yeah.
be that advocate, even if you don't have the job title, right? Like, how do you create that space and immerse yourself in that world or try it out, right? And experiment and see what you can do.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, Stephanie, I've kept you a long time, so we just have a few more sort of lightning round questions. And I know you've got to go back and do this work right now. So I'm going to go with the very first one. What's a favorite tool or practice that you swear by when you're leading org design, leading change inside of an org?
Yeah, I think one that comes to mind is Five Dysfunctions of a Team, Patrick Lencioni. It's a classic, a
Mhm.
super short read, but one of those things that if you use that framework with teams, it always works. And it's crazy. Use it a lot of times throughout my career, and it works every time, which is just wild because it's just so well done. So that's a great one that I love leaning on when you've got teams forming, teams grappling with conflict, teams trying to get to that high performing state. Like no matter what phase people are in, it's there's great insights for everyone.
How about the worst advice you've ever heard or, or learned about leadership and org
Yeah,
design?
I think there's this myth out there that extroverts make the best leaders, and people think of that charismatic leader that, is always talking and kind of showing up in ways and people listen to them. And I think there's so much about like the introverted leader that is so fascinating and knowing that actually it's the diversity of different perspectives and personalities that make the world go round. And so I think for those people out there who are maybe those quieter leaders, like watching things, absorbing information, like, how do you find that moment to then add value? Like, it's not just the extroverts that will lead the world. It's those ambiverts, introverts. The diversity helps us all uh, bring different perspectives to life.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, almost the last question. You mentioned already Patrick Lencioni's Five Dysfunctions of a Team. So there's a book. Perhaps what's one idea or quote that's helped to shape your work?
Ooh, it's hard to just one, Justin.
Okay. You can pick two or three. That's fine. I don't
I
mind.
mean, I think Design a Better Business is something a book that you wrote that's on my bookshelf, and I'll pull it
Yeah,
out thinking about different,
cool.
tools and things for teams, that's really helpful. There's also something ca a book similar style that's Design Thinking Toolbox, and it's got a million different tools in there around design thinking for every piece of the phase, from empathy to execution. How do you, like, show up and do really well? I think something that's really influential in what I've done work with teams is Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger, the Disney CEO, Disney executive. And he talks about like pitching for the job of getting the CEO role and having a laundry list of things like this is all what we should do. And someone was like, Bob, you get three things. What are the three things you're going to do? How do you make it simple and really pitch for people? And I think there's a lot of power in that clarity and focus for teams and leaders.
Yeah,
And so that's been something I've used with teams, and then they're like, "Right,
yeah,
if a company at that size and scale can use that lesson of simplicity and focus, we should too," right? And it's amazing
yeah.
how that helps drive alignment and clarity for teams.
All right, that's fantastic. Well, Stephanie, I want to wrap it up with one more question, which is where do people find you if they want to talk to you about what you do, whether it's Olympic rowing or, which we didn't talk about, or org design, strategy, those kinds of things? Where do they find you?
Yeah, can find me on LinkedIn, my information's there, feel free to send a ping, and would love to chat and connect.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you again. I'm so excited to have just reconnected with you in general. It was always lovely working with you at BMI and then speaking with you afterwards. And I truly appreciate your time here today. And I'm excited to keep this conversation
Yeah,
going.
thanks so much for having me, Justin, super fun.
Yeah, cool. I'll see you in a
Sounds
little bit.
good.
Thanks for listening to Design Shift. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a quick rating or review. It really helps more designers like you find the show, and it helps me make better shows. And if you're not already subscribed to our awesome newsletter, head over to designshift.me. See you next time.